Good evening, and congratulations, you've chosen boredom on purpose. Tonight we're diving into one of history's most catastrophic volcanic eruptions, and I promise you'll either fall asleep learning something fascinating or stay awake wondering how humanity survived such cosmic level destruction. Either way, you're about to experience the aftermath of Krakatoa's 1883 eruption, a disaster so violent it literally reshaped the world's geography and probably gave Mother Nature herself a migraine. Picture this, it's August 28th, 1883, and you're slowly regaining consciousness in what used to be a thriving coastal village in the Dutch East Indies. The ground beneath you feels wrong, gritty soft, and uncomfortably warm. Your ears are ringing from an explosion so loud it was heard in Australia, nearly 2,000 miles away. That's like setting off fireworks in New York and having people in Denver complain about the noise. You probably won't survive what you're about to witness, but somehow, miraculously, you did survive the night that changed everything. The air tastes metallic and bitter, thick with volcanic ash that makes every breath feel like inhaling powdered concrete. Above you, the sky isn't blue, it's a sickly yellow-brown, like an old sepia photograph come to life. The sun, when you can glimpse it through the ash clouds, looks like a dim orange disk struggling to pierce through nature's own version of nuclear winter. Your clothes are covered in fine gray powder that seems to get into everything: your hair, your mouth, the creases of your skin. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment letting me know where you're listening from and what time it is there. I'm always curious about our little global community of history nerds and insomniacs. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You struggle to your feet, and immediately you realize the landscape has been fundamentally altered. What was once your neighbor's house is now a pile of splintered wood and twisted metal, half buried under several feet of volcanic debris. The familiar path to the village well has disappeared, entirely replaced by undulating dunes of ash that shift and swirl with every gust of wind. Palm trees that yesterday swayed gracefully in the tropical breeze now stand like gray ghosts, their fronds stripped away and their trunks coated in the same fine powder that covers everything else. The silence is almost more disturbing than the destruction. No birds sing, no insects buzz. Even the ever-present sound of the ocean seems muffled and distant. It's as if the world has been placed under a thick, suffocating blanket. You take a tentative step forward, and your foot sinks into ash up to your ankle. Each movement sends up small clouds of dust that make you cough and cover your mouth with whatever clean fabric you can find. In the distance, you can make out other figures moving slowly through this transformed landscape, fellow survivors, perhaps, or maybe just shadows cast by the strange filtered light. They move like sleepwalkers stumbling over debris and stopping frequently to stare at the unrecognizable world around them. Some call out names, family members, friends, neighbors, but their voices seem to be swallowed by the ash-laden air almost before they leave their lips. The temperature feels wrong too. Despite the tropical climate you're accustomed to, there's an odd chill in the air. The massive amounts of ash and sulfur dioxide pumped into the atmosphere have begun to block sunlight, creating a cooling effect that will persist for months. You shiver slightly, realizing that this is just the beginning of the changes you'll witness. The eruption of Krakatoa wasn't just a single catastrophic event, it was the opening act of a transformation that would reshape entire ecosystems and alter global weather patterns for years to come. As you begin to pick your way through the ash covered ruins of your world, you have no idea that you're about to witness one of the most remarkable recovery stories in natural history. You take your first full steps into this transformed world and immediately understand why walking has become an expedition rather than simple movement. The ash isn't just a light dusting, it's a knee-deep ocean of fine volcanic particles that have settled into every depression, filled every valley, and turned familiar roads into treacherous obstacle courses. Each step requires you to lift your leg high, almost like you're wading through thick gray snow that never melts. The consistency is unlike anything you've experienced before. It's not quite sand, not quite dust, but something in between, a powder so fine it seems to flow like liquid when disturbed, yet so pervasive it clings to everything it touches. Your boots, if you still have them, quickly become caked with the stuff, making each step heavier than the last. You quickly learn to shuffle rather than walk, conserving energy while trying to avoid the deeper drifts that could swallow you up to your waist. What strikes you most is how this ash has completely erased the familiar contours of your world. The gentle slope that led down to the harbor has vanished, replaced by a series of undulating hills that shift constantly in the wind. Trees that once marked boundaries and provided shade now poke through the gray landscape like fence posts, their branches stripped bare and their trunks serving as the only remaining landmarks in this alien terrain. The ash plays tricks on your perception too. What looks like solid ground often gives way beneath your feet, revealing hidden hollows where buildings once stood. You learn to test each step using a stick or piece of debris to probe ahead before committing your full weight. It's exhausting work, and you find yourself stopping frequently to rest each pause, sending up small clouds of dust that make you cough and squint. Historians still argue whether the ash fall from Krakatoa was the heaviest ever recorded, but standing here in its aftermath, you don't need scientific measurements to understand its magnitude. The layer covering your village is easily 3 feet deep, and you can see in the distance where it reaches even higher, 5, 6, even 10 feet in some areas where the wind patterns concentrated the fallout. The ash isn't just inconvenient, it's actively dangerous. When the wind picks up, which it does frequently, the fine particles become airborne again, creating choking clouds that reduce visibility to mere yards. You learn to wrap cloth around your face, but even then the dust finds ways to infiltrate your makeshift mask. Your eyes water constantly, and you develop a persistent cough that will plague you for weeks. Rivers and streams have become particularly treacherous. What once flowed clear and fresh now runs thick with volcanic sediment, looking more like liquid concrete than water. Some waterways have been completely dammed by ash deposits, creating strange new lakes where none existed before. Others have changed course entirely, carving new channels through the soft volcanic material and abandoning their old beds forever. You notice something peculiar about the ash itself. It's not uniform. Some areas contain larger chunks of pumice, lightweight volcanic rock that floats on water and crunches underfoot like volcanic popcorn. These pieces tell the story of the eruption's violence, each fragment representing molten rock that was blown high into the atmosphere and cooled rapidly as it fell. In other spots, the ash is so fine it's almost powder created when the volcanic material was pulverized by the tremendous pressures of the explosion. The wildlife that managed to survive the initial blast now faces a new challenge entirely. You occasionally glimpse birds attempting to fly, but their wings quickly become clogged with ash, forcing them to land and attempt to clean themselves, a nearly impossible task when everything around them is covered in the same fine powder. Those that can't adapt quickly enough simply don't survive, adding to the death toll that extends far beyond the human casualties. As you continue your slow progress through this transformed landscape, you begin to notice something both hopeful and disturbing. In some areas, the ash has already begun to show signs of change. Where it's been dampened by what little moisture remains in the air, it's starting to compact and harden, creating a crust that might eventually support new growth. But this same hardening process is also sealing away whatever lies beneath buildings, vegetation, perhaps even people who didn't escape in time. The sheer scale of the ash coverage becomes clear as you climb to higher ground. Looking out over the landscape, you can see the gray blanket extending in all directions, transforming islands into unrecognizable shapes and filling in coastal areas that were once open water. It's as if someone has taken a giant eraser to the map and redrawn the coastline entirely. You're witnessing the literal reshaping of geography in real time, watching as familiar landmarks disappear beneath this volcanic shroud. The next morning, you make your way toward what was once the harbor, though navigation requires pure guesswork now that every familiar landmark has vanished beneath the gray blanket. As you crest a small hill of compacted ash, the sight that greets you stops you dead in your tracks. The ocean, which should be sparkling blue under the tropical sun, has been transformed into something from humanity's darkest nightmares, a vast floating graveyard that stretches to the horizon. Bodies bob in the waves like grotesque corks, thousands upon thousands of them, creating a carpet of death so dense that in some areas you can barely see the water beneath. The tsunami waves, some reaching heights of 100 feet, had swept entire villages out to sea, and now the ocean is giving back its grim harvest. Men, women, children, and animals drift together in this macabre flotilla, their forms bloated and unrecognizable after days in the salt water. Ships attempting to navigate these waters face an impossible task. You watch as a Dutch steamship tries to chart a course through the debris field, its crew using long poles to push aside corpses that threaten to clog their propellers. The sound carries across the water, a sickening squelch and splash that makes your stomach turn. These aren't just statistics in some distant report. These are your neighbors, your friends, people you shared meals with just days ago. The stench is overwhelming, even from your elevated position. The tropical heat has accelerated decomposition, creating a smell so potent it seems to have physical weight, pressing down on you like a suffocating blanket. You pull your makeshift ash mask higher over your nose, but nothing can completely block out the smell of death on this scale. It's a scent that will haunt survivors for the rest of their lives, triggering memories decades later whenever they catch a whiff of anything even remotely similar. Contemporary engravings would later show ships sailing through seas of corpses, but standing here witnessing it firsthand, You understand that no artist could truly capture the horror of this scene. The illustrations will be sanitized, made palatable for newspaper readers thousands of miles away. They won't convey the way bodies bump against each other with each wave, or how the ocean itself seems to have turned into a thick, organic soup. Rescue efforts, such as they are, have begun in earnest. You spot several smaller boats, brave enough to venture into this hellscape, their crews working methodically to recover bodies for burial. It's dangerous work. The water is still choked with debris from destroyed buildings, uprooted trees, and chunks of volcanic rock. One boat you're watching gets tangled in what appears to be fishing nets, but turns out to be the twisted remains of a house's roof beams, still trailing pieces of thatch and broken pottery. The most disturbing aspect isn't just the number of bodies, but their distribution. The tsunami didn't discriminate. Babies drift alongside elderly fishermen, wealthy Dutch colonists bob next to Javanese farmers. Social hierarchies that seemed so important just a week ago have been rendered meaningless by the ocean's democratic embrace of death. You realize you're witnessing the aftermath of a force so powerful it literally reshuffled human society in a matter of hours. Historians still argue whether the death toll reached 36,000 or if it climbed even higher, but watching this floating cemetery, you understand that exact numbers become irrelevant when faced with suffering on this scale. Each body represents not just a life lost, but an entire network of relationships, severed families, destroyed communities, erased generations of knowledge and tradition, silenced forever. What makes the scene even more surreal is the contrast with the surviving landscape. Palm trees that somehow weathered the tsunami stand at odd angles, their trunks scarred and their fronds gone, but they're still there like spectators watching this aquatic funeral procession. Pieces of buildings, a door here, a window frame there, float among the bodies, creating a bizarre museum of everyday life, interrupted mid-sentence. You notice something that will stick with you forever. The ocean's rhythm hasn't changed. Waves still crash against the shore with the same eternal cadence they've maintained for millennia, completely indifferent to the human tragedy they're now orchestrating. Every surge brings more bodies closer to shore, while the backwash pulls others out to sea. It's a grotesque dance that will continue for weeks until currents finally disperse this floating graveyard across the Indian Ocean. The practical implications are staggering. Fishing the lifeblood of these coastal communities has become impossible. Even if the boats had survived, which most didn't, no one could bear to cast nets into waters so thoroughly contaminated with death. The ocean, once a source of sustenance and livelihood, has become a massive burial ground that will take months to clear and years to trust again. 3 days after the disaster, you begin to notice something remarkable happening amidst all the death and devastation. Life, it seems, refuses to be completely defeated. As you carefully pick your way through the ash-covered landscape, avoiding the deeper drifts that could swallow you whole, you spot the first signs of what scientists will later call primary succession, nature's incredible ability to start over from literally nothing. A tiny spider dangles from a nearly invisible strand of silk, spinning slowly in the ash-laden breeze. It's such a small thing, hardly worth noticing under normal circumstances, but in this gray wasteland, it represents something profound. This little eight-legged pioneer didn't walk here. It flew carried by winds that lifted it from some distant surviving patch of vegetation and deposited it in this sterile volcanic moonscape. It's probably confused and definitely hungry, but it's alive, and that makes it the bravest explorer you've ever encountered. The spider represents what scientists call ballooning, a dispersal method that sounds like something from a children's fairy tale, but is actually a sophisticated survival strategy. Young spiders release long strands of silk that catch the wind like microscopic parachutes, carrying them sometimes hundreds of miles to new territories. What was once just an interesting biological footnote has now become a lifeline for recolonizing devastated landscapes. You crouch down for a closer look, careful not to disturb this tiny colonist, and notice something else extraordinary. Scattered across the ash surface are minuscule green specks, seeds so small they're barely visible to the naked eye. They've arrived the same way as the spider, hitchhiking on air currents that cared nothing for the volcanic apocalypse below. Most of these seeds will die, of course. The ash provides no nutrients, little moisture, and conditions that would challenge even the hardiest desert plants. But some, just a few, might find exactly the right combination of shelter, moisture, and luck to germinate. The process you're witnessing is both brutally harsh and incredibly hopeful. For every 100 seeds that land here, maybe one will sprout. Of those that sprout, perhaps 1 in 100 will survive long enough to produce more seeds. It's a numbers game played on an epic scale, with evolution itself placing bets on countless long shots, knowing that eventually some will pay off. Historians still argue whether Krakatoa's recolonization happened faster than expected or if the timeline was typical for such disasters. But from your perspective, as a witness to the very beginning, the speed seems miraculous. Within days of the eruption, these microscopic pioneers are already staking claims on territory that still radiates heat from volcanic activity. What's particularly fascinating is how these early colonists seem specifically adapted for exactly this kind of catastrophe. The spider's silk is strong enough to withstand the abrasive volcanic dust, and its ability to survive weeks without food means it can endure the lean times while an ecosystem slowly builds around it. Similarly, the wind-blown seeds tend to be from plants that specialize in harsh conditions, species that evolved specifically to be first responders to environmental disasters. You spend the better part of an hour watching these tiny dramas unfold. A seed lands in a small depression where morning dew has collected, creating a miniature oasis in the volcanic desert. Another spider arrives, this one, larger, perhaps an adult female, ready to establish territory and eventually reproduce. Each arrival is like watching the first pages of a book, being written a story that will take decades to fully unfold, but begins here with these infinitesimal acts of biological courage. The wind patterns that bring these colonists tell their own story. The prevailing currents carry biological cargo from surviving areas, perhaps from elevated regions that escaped the worst of the tsunami, or from distant islands that were spared entirely. Ujung Kulon, just 25 miles away, is probably supplying many of these aerial immigrants, though the seeds and spiders have no idea they're participating in one of the largest ecological restoration projects in recorded history. What strikes you most is the complete randomness of it all. There's no grand plan, no coordination, no conscious effort to restore what was lost. These organisms are simply following their programmed behaviors, spiders ballooning when population pressure builds plants, producing seeds designed to travel far and wide. Yet somehow this chaotic scattering of life across the devastated landscape will eventually result in functioning ecosystems more complex and resilient than anything human planners could design. You stand up, slowly brushing ash from your knees, and take one last look at the spider still hanging in the breeze. Tomorrow you'll check this spot again, and the day after that. You have a feeling you're going to want to remember exactly where you witnessed the moment life began, its comeback from the edge of extinction. A week has passed since the eruption, and you're beginning to understand that surviving the initial disaster was just the opening act of a much longer, more grueling performance. The immediate terror of exploding mountains and 100-foot waves has been replaced by the grinding daily struggle of staying alive in a world where every basic necessity has become a life-threatening challenge. Water is your most pressing concern. The wells that once provided clean drinking water are now choked with volcanic ash, creating a gray sludge that's about as appetizing as liquid concrete and probably just as nutritious. You've learned to dig small pits near what used to be streams, hoping that seepage will provide something approaching drinkable water. But even then, you have to strain it through multiple layers of cloth to remove the worst of the grit. The taste is metallic and bitter, and you wonder what long-term effects you're courting with every sip. Food presents an equally dire situation. The few remaining coconut palms have been stripped of their fruit by the blast winds, and their trunks are so coated with ash that climbing them would be like trying to scale a powdered chimney. Rice paddies that once fed entire villages have been transformed into gray, sterile moonscapes where nothing grows and nothing will grow for months to come. You've become an expert at identifying which buildings might have had food stores, learning to read the subtle variations in ash deposits that might indicate a buried kitchen or storage room. The psychological toll might be the worst part of all. Every night you're jolted awake by phantom explosions, your traumatized mind replaying the sounds of the world ending. Sleep, when it comes at all, is fitful and plagued by dreams of walls of water and skies that rain fire. During the day, you catch yourself constantly scanning the horizon for signs of another eruption, another tsunami, another catastrophe that might finish what Krakatoa started. Your fellow survivors aren't handling things much better. People who were once pillars of the community now wander aimlessly through the ash-covered ruins, talking to themselves or to family members who are no longer there. Children who manage to survive have developed a 1,000-yard stare that seems far too old for their faces. Some people have simply given up sitting in whatever shelter they can find and waiting for either rescue or death, whichever comes first. The social order that once governed daily life has completely collapsed. Wealthy Dutch colonists who used to command respect now beg for scraps alongside local farmers. Traditional hierarchies based on race class and occupation have become meaningless when everyone is equally covered in ash and equally desperate for clean water. It's a leveling that might have been revolutionary under different circumstances, but here it just feels like another layer of the catastrophe. Communication with the outside world has been severed completely. The telegraph lines that once connected these islands to the broader Dutch Empire lie buried under tons of volcanic debris or simply don't exist anymore. The poles that supported them swept away by the tsunami. You have no idea if help is coming or if anyone even knows you're alive. For all you know, the entire world has ended, and this ash-covered wasteland is all that remains of human civilization. Historians still argue whether the psychological effects of natural disasters, like Krakatoa, created lasting changes in survivor communities, but living through it, you can feel the trauma reshaping not just individuals, but the entire social fabric. People who once trusted in the stability of the natural world now flinch at every cloud that passes overhead. The very concept of safe has been redefined to mean temporarily not dying. Disease has become another enemy. With sanitation systems destroyed and clean water, scarce dysentery spreads quickly through the survivor camps. Small cuts that would have been minor inconveniences become infected when exposed to the ash-contaminated environment. You've learned to treat every injury, no matter how trivial, as a potential death sentence, cleaning wounds with precious drinking water and fashioning bandages from the cleanest cloth you can find. The days blend together in a monotonous cycle of survival tasks. Dawn brings the search for water, midday, the hunt for food, and evening, the exhausting work of maintaining whatever shelter you've managed to construct. Each day that you successfully complete this cycle feels like a minor miracle, a small victory against forces that seem determined to finish the job that Krakatoa started. Yet despite everything, you notice something remarkable happening. Humans, like those pioneering spiders and seeds, are beginning to adapt. People are sharing resources without being asked, forming small communities based on mutual survival rather than old social divisions. Skills that seemed irrelevant in the civilized world, like finding clean water or identifying edible plants, have suddenly become the most valuable knowledge anyone possesses. You're witnessing the birth of a new kind of society, one forged by shared trauma and shaped by the absolute necessity of cooperation. 2 months have passed since the disaster, and you're beginning to understand one of history's most profound ironies. The same tsunami waves that destroyed so many lives have inadvertently created what will become one of the world's most important wildlife sanctuaries. You're standing at the edge of what was once a thriving coastal settlement called Ujung Kulon, but now there's nothing here except jungle reclaiming the scattered remnants of human habitation. The waves that swept through this area were particularly devastating. Some reports suggest they reached 40 feet in height as they crashed inland, carrying away every structure, every person, every trace of the community that had called this place home for generations. Unlike other devastated areas where survivors have begun the slow process of rebuilding, Ujung Kulon remains completely abandoned. The few people who might have escaped the initial disaster have never returned, leaving nature to begin its own reconstruction project without any human interference. Walking through what were once village streets, you can barely make out the foundations of buildings beneath the rapidly growing vegetation. Tropical plants, it seems, waste no time in claiming territory. Vines have already begun to wrap around the few concrete posts that survived the tsunami, and fast-growing shrubs have sprouted in what used to be someone's front yard. The jungle doesn't mourn the human tragedy, It simply sees opportunity in the form of cleared land and abandoned space. The silence here is different from the eerie quiet that followed the initial disaster. This isn't the stunned silence of shock and devastation. It's the productive quiet of nature getting back to work. Birds have returned, though not the same species that lived here before. These are pioneer species, the biological equivalent of those wind-blown spiders and seeds you observed weeks ago. They're the advanced scouts of ecosystem recovery, testing the waters and establishing beachheads for the more complex communities that will follow. What makes Ujung Kulon's situation unique is its location on the remote northwestern tip of Java. Even before the disaster, this area was relatively isolated, connected to larger population centers by difficult overland routes and irregular boat service. The tsunami didn't just destroy the community, it eliminated the infrastructure that made resettlement practical. Roads were washed away, harbors were filled with debris, and the few government buildings that might have coordinated recovery efforts were completely obliterated. Historians still argue whether the Dutch colonial administration made a conscious decision to abandon Ujung Kulon, or if the area was simply forgotten in the chaos of dealing with more accessible disaster zones. But the result is the same. For the first time in centuries, perhaps millennia, this coastal region is free from human pressure. No hunting, no farming, no logging, no development, just the slow, patient work of ecological restoration. You encounter your first clear evidence of this transformation when you spot fresh elephant tracks in the mud near what used to be the village well. These massive footprints tell a story of wildlife beginning to reclaim territory that was once strictly human domain. Elephants are intelligent animals. They would have fled to higher ground when the tsunami approached, and now they're cautiously returning to investigate this new landscape where the threatening human scent has been literally washed away. The tracks lead toward a small river that has carved a new channel through the ash and debris, creating a fresh corridor through the recovering jungle. Following this path, you discover something extraordinary, a complex ecosystem already beginning to reassemble itself in the ruins of human civilization. Fish have returned to the cleared river, their populations exploding in the absence of human fishing pressure. These fish attract birds, which in turn attract larger predators, creating a food web that's rebuilding itself from the ground up. What's particularly remarkable is how quickly the natural recovery is proceeding compared to human reconstruction efforts. While other areas still struggle with basic necessities like clean water and adequate shelter, Ujung Kulon is already showing signs of becoming a thriving wilderness. Plants that were nearly extinct due to human pressure are beginning to reestablish themselves, and animal populations that had been pushed to the margins are moving back into prime habitat. You realize you're witnessing something that rarely happens in human history, the complete withdrawal of human influence from a significant piece of land, allowing natural processes to proceed without interference. It's an uncontrolled experiment in ecosystem recovery, and early results suggest that nature is far more resilient and adaptable than anyone had imagined. The irony isn't lost on you that this accidental conservation success story was born from such tremendous human suffering. The same forces that killed thousands of people and destroyed countless communities have created the conditions for one of the most successful wildlife recovery stories of the modern era. You're standing in what will eventually become a national park, though that designation is still decades in the future and will come only after people realize what remarkable renewal has taken place in this forgotten corner of the world. 6 months after the disaster, you're tracking what appear to be massive footprints through the recovering jungle of Ujung Kulon when you hear something that stops you dead in your tracks. A deep, rumbling call that seems to come from the very earth itself. It's a sound you've never heard before, low and resonant, like distant thunder that never quite fades away. You're about to encounter one of the rarest and most elusive beneficiaries of Krakatoa's accidental conservation project, the Javan rhinoceros. Following the sound requires patience and more than a little courage. These aren't gentle creatures. Javan rhinos are massive, powerful animals with temperaments that can shift from placid grazing to explosive aggression in seconds. But they're also incredibly secretive, having learned through generations of human pressure that survival depends on staying hidden. The fact that you're hearing them at all suggests they're beginning to feel safer in their tsunami-cleansed sanctuary. The tracks you're following tell a story of gradual expansion. These deep, three-toed impressions show a pattern of movement that suggests the rhinos are no longer confining themselves to the deepest, most inaccessible parts of the jungle. They're venturing into areas that were once too dangerous due to human activity testing boundaries that no longer exist, exploring territory that has been returned to them by the ocean's terrible gift. When you finally catch your first glimpse of a Javan rhino, the experience is nothing short of magical. This massive bull, probably weighing close to a ton, emerges from the green shadows like a creature from another era. His hide is a patchwork of gray-brown armor plates separated by deep folds that give him an almost prehistoric appearance. Only the males carry prominent horns. This one's single curved horn gleams wetly in the filtered jungle light, a weapon that could easily kill you, but is currently being used for the decidedly peaceful purpose of scratching an itch on a nearby tree. What strikes you most about this encounter is the rhino's apparent calm. There's no sign of the skittish behavior that characterizes animals under constant human pressure. He knows you're there. Rhinos have excellent hearing and a keen sense of smell, but he's not immediately fleeing. This suggests something remarkable. For perhaps the first time in living memory, these animals are beginning to feel secure in their environment. You hold your breath as a female emerges from the underbrush, her smaller size and lack of a prominent horn identifying her as the bull's mate. She moves with surprising grace. For such a massive animal, her prehensile upper lip delicately selecting leaves and shoots as she feeds. The scene has an almost Eden-like quality. Two of the world's rarest large mammals going about their daily business in a jungle paradise where humans are no longer a threat. Historians still argue whether the Javan rhino population was already declining before Krakatoa's eruption, or if hunting pressure had stabilized at sustainable levels, but watching these magnificent creatures in their tsunami-granted sanctuary, you understand that the disaster may have literally saved the species from extinction. With human settlements eliminated and hunting pressure removed, the remaining rhinos have been given something invaluable: space and time to recover. The feeding behavior you're observing reveals the complex ecological relationships that make rhino survival possible. These animals are ecosystem engineers, using their massive bodies and powerful jaws to create clearings in the dense jungle vegetation. The paths they carve become highways for smaller animals, and the areas they clear provide habitat for different plant species. By eating some plants and trampling others, they maintain the complex mosaic of forest types that supports the incredible biodiversity of Ujung Kulon. What's particularly poignant about this encounter is realizing how close you are to witnessing something that may never happen again. There are probably fewer than 70 Javan rhinos left in the entire world, all of them here in this accidentally preserved sanctuary. You're looking at a significant percentage of the entire global population of one of evolution's most successful designs, a lineage that survived ice ages, continental drift, and millions of years of environmental change, only to be nearly eliminated by a few centuries of human expansion. The female moves closer, and you can see the distinctive triangular fold of skin at her neck, one of the features that distinguishes Javan rhinos from their Asian relatives. She seems completely unaware that she's one of the rarest large mammals on Earth, focused entirely on the immediate concerns of finding the choicest leaves and staying alert for any signs of danger. Her calm confidence in this environment is testament to how completely the tsunami has transformed the relationship between humans and wildlife in this region. As you watch these incredible animals go about their daily routines in their accidental paradise, you realize you're witnessing one of conservation's greatest success stories, even though it came at a cost that no one would ever willingly pay. A year has passed since the eruption, and you find yourself standing on the beach of Ujung Kulon, watching a remarkable parade of botanical refugees washing ashore. The ocean, which once delivered death in the form of tsunamis and floating corpses, has now become nature's postal service, delivering seeds and plant fragments from distant shores to begin the slow work of ecological reconstruction. The morning tide has left a fascinating collection of biological treasures scattered across the volcanic sand. Pandanus seeds encased in their buoyant, fibrous husks bob in the gentle surf like natural life preservers. These remarkable seeds can survive months floating in salt water, their tough outer shells protecting the genetic material inside, while ocean currents carry them hundreds of miles from their parent plants. Some of these seeds may have originated from the very jungle you're standing in, swept out to sea by the tsunami, and now returning home like prodigal children. You pick up one of these seeds and marvel at its ingenious design. The fibrous husk isn't just protection, it's also a flotation device, allowing the seed to ride ocean currents like a microscopic ship. The outer layers will gradually break down in the salt water, but at just the right rate to ensure the seed remains viable until it finds suitable habitat. It's a timing mechanism evolved over millions of years, calibrated to the rhythms of monsoons and currents that have remained relatively constant since long before humans walked the earth. Further up the beach, you discover something even more remarkable: seeds that have already begun to sprout in the sand just above the high tide line. These pandanus seedlings, no bigger than your thumb, represent successful completions of journeys that began months ago on distant shores. Their tiny roots are already probing downward, seeking fresh water beneath the salt-soaked surface, while their first leaves unfurl toward the sun like green flags of conquest. The success rate is brutally low. For every 100 seeds that wash ashore, perhaps one will find conditions suitable for germination, and of those, maybe 1 in 10 will survive to maturity. But the ocean doesn't worry about efficiency. It simply keeps delivering biological packages to every available shore, playing a numbers game on such a vast scale that even tiny success rates eventually add up to thriving populations. You notice that the seeds aren't arriving randomly. Ocean currents and prevailing winds create predictable patterns of dispersal, with certain beaches receiving more biological immigrants than others. The protected coves of Ujung Kulon seem particularly favored their calm waters, allowing seeds to settle gently rather than being dashed against rocks or swept back out to sea. It's as if the geography itself is conspiring to concentrate recovery efforts in the areas most suitable for new growth. Historians still argue whether ocean-borne seed dispersal was the primary mechanism for island recolonization, or if wind-carried propagules played a larger role. But standing here watching the tide deliver tomorrow's forest, you understand that both methods are working together in a complex ballet of biological renewal. The ocean brings the larger seeds, those too heavy for wind transport, while air currents deliver the tiny pioneers that can establish themselves in the harshest conditions. What's particularly fascinating is the international nature of this biological relief effort. But some of these seeds have clearly traveled from Java, others from Sumatra, and still others from islands hundreds of miles away. The disaster that isolated these devastated areas from human help has connected them to a vast network of plant communities across the Indian Ocean. Seeds don't carry passports or recognize political boundaries. They simply follow the ancient highways of wind and water that have been distributing life around the planet for hundreds of millions of years. You spend the afternoon tracking the progress of various beach colonists. Some seeds have landed in spots that are clearly unsuitable, too close to the salt spray, too far from fresh water, or buried too deeply in shifting sand. But others have found ideal niches where they're already establishing the foundation of what will eventually become a coastal forest. Young coconut palms, their fronds still tender and small, mark the spots where previous seed deliveries have succeeded. The process you're witnessing is called oceanic dispersal, and it's one of the primary mechanisms by which isolated islands develop their unique ecosystems. What makes this situation special is that you're seeing it happen in real time, compressed into a recovery timeline that normally takes place over geological ages. The tsunami cleared the slate so completely that you can observe primary succession from the very beginning, watching as bare volcanic sand transforms into organized plant communities through nothing more than wind waves and evolutionary wisdom. As evening approaches and another tide begins to rise, you notice fresh deliveries arriving with the incoming water. Tomorrow morning will bring another collection of botanical immigrants, another chance for life to establish itself in this recovering paradise, another chapter in the slow but inexorable story of nature's comeback from the edge of extinction. 45 years have passed since that world-shaking explosion, and you're standing on the deck of a research vessel watching something that defies belief emerge from the exact spot where Krakatoa once stood. It's 1928, and the sea is literally giving birth to a new island, Anak Krakatoa, the child of Krakatoa, in a series of violent eruptions that seem determined to rebuild what was destroyed nearly half a century ago. The water around your boat churns with volcanic debris, hot ash, and steam as molten rock breaks the surface like some primordial creature breaching for air. Each explosion sends columns of fire and smoke hundreds of feet into the air, while chunks of cooling lava crash back into the sea with tremendous hissing sounds. The ocean itself seems to be boiling, creating a cauldron of superheated water that glows red in the reflected light of the eruption. You're witnessing the birth of an island, in real time watching as the earth quite literally builds new land from its molten core. What makes this spectacle even more remarkable is its location. Anak, Krakatoa is rising from the exact center of the underwater crater left by its parents' catastrophic collapse. It's as if the volcano is determined to restore what was lost, rebuilding itself from the inside out, with the patient persistence of geological time compressed into human observable decades. Each eruption adds new material to the growing cone layer upon layer of cooling lava and volcanic ash that slowly but steadily raises the new island higher above the waves. The violence of these eruptions is breathtaking but also strangely organized. Unlike the chaotic explosion that destroyed the original Krakatoa, these eruptions follow predictable patterns, periods of intense activity, alternating with relative calm, allowing the new volcanic material time to cool and solidify before the next round of construction begins. It's like watching a master mason at work building with fire and stone, according to blueprints written in the Earth's own geological memory. By the time you're observing it, Anak Krakatoa has already grown to over 1,000 feet in height, a mountain born from the sea in just a few short decades. The slopes are steep and barren, covered in fresh volcanic rock that ranges from black obsidian to reddish scoria, depending on how quickly it cooled after eruption. The entire island radiates heat, and you can see steam rising from various points where rainwater meets the still warm volcanic surface. What fascinates scientists is how quickly life begins to colonize this brand new land. Even while eruptions continue intermittently, pioneer species are already attempting to establish footholds on the cooling volcanic slopes. You spot the familiar sight of wind-borne spiders trailing their silk parachutes, some successfully landing on the new island despite the hostile conditions. Seeds arrive on every tide, and some particularly hardy species manage to germinate in crevices where rainwater has collected and volcanic ash has begun to break down into primitive soil. Historians still argue whether Anak Krakatoa's eruptions were unusually violent for a newborn volcano, or if this level of activity was typical for such geological births. But watching from your research vessel, you understand that you're witnessing one of nature's most fundamental processes, the creation of new habitat through volcanic activity. This isn't just destruction, it's construction on a massive scale using the Earth's internal heat to manufacture new real estate for life to colonize. The island's growth isn't steady or predictable. Some eruptions add significant height and bulk, while others seem to tear down previous progress, creating new craters and valleys in the volcanic cone. It's a chaotic process that follows its own internal logic, driven by the pressure and composition of magma rising from deep within the earth. Each eruption is different. Some produce flowing lava that builds up the island's foundation, while others explode violently, showering the surrounding area with ash and debris. The surrounding waters tell their own story of rapid ecological change. The volcanic activity has created new underwater topography, with lava flows extending beneath the waves to form artificial reefs that are already attracting marine life. Fish that specialize in disturbed environments have moved in quickly, followed by the predators that feed on them. The hot volcanic vents on the seafloor create unique microhabitats where specialized organisms thrive in conditions that would be lethal to most life forms. What's particularly striking is how this new creation contrasts with the mature ecosystems you observed on the surviving fragments of old Krakatoa. While Rakata Island, the largest remaining piece of the original volcano, has developed into a lush, tropical forest over the past 45 years, Anak Krakatoa remains a stark lunar landscape where only the hardiest pioneers can survive. It's like looking at two different stages of ecological time, one representing decades of patient recovery, the other showing the raw beginning of the colonization process. As your research vessel maintains a safe distance from the ongoing eruptions, you realize you're watching the opening chapter of what will become another remarkable story of ecological succession played out on land that literally didn't exist when your grandparents were young. 100 years have passed since that August morning when the world exploded, and you find yourself standing in a place that shouldn't exist, a thriving tropical paradise built on the bones of catastrophe. The jungle around you hums with life so abundant, it's almost overwhelming, a symphony of insects, birds, and rustling leaves that speaks to nature's incredible power of renewal. You're in Ujung Kulon, now officially designated as a national park, and the transformation is so complete that without historical knowledge, you'd never guess this Eden was born from humanity's darkest hour. The trees towering above you are massive, some approaching their centenary, having sprouted in the ash-enriched soil just years after the disaster. Their trunks are so thick you couldn't wrap your arms around them if you tried, and their canopy creates a green cathedral where shafts of sunlight filter through like natural stained glass. These giants are the success stories, the lottery winners among the millions of seeds that washed ashore or drifted in on wind currents during those first crucial years of recolonization. Every step you take reveals another layer of the recovery story. The forest floor is a complex tapestry of decomposing leaves, fallen branches, and new growth, creating the kind of rich soil that takes decades to develop. Fungal networks span vast distances, underground, connecting trees in a communication system that helps them share resources and warn each other of threats. What looks like individual plants is actually a vast cooperative community that has learned to thrive in this tsunami-cleared sanctuary. The wildlife diversity is staggering. Over 700 species of animals now call this place home, ranging from tiny insects to those magnificent Javan rhinos whose descendants still roam these protected forests. You spot a family of leaf monkeys swinging through the canopy, their calls echoing through the green spaces where once only silence reigned. Colorful birds flash between branches, kingfishers, hornbills, and dozens of species that have found refuge here as human development eliminated their habitat elsewhere. The river systems have carved new channels through the landscape, creating wetlands and mudflats that support entirely different communities of life. The same Siginer River where you once watched the first tentative signs of recovery, now hosts complex ecosystems where mudskipper fish build elaborate territories, monitor lizards hunt along the banks, and countless species of crabs scuttle through the shallows. Each microhabitat supports its own specialized community, creating a biological mosaic of incredible complexity. Perhaps most remarkably, the Javan rhinoceros population has not just survived but stabilized. While still critically endangered with fewer than 70 individuals, these magnificent creatures have found in Ujung Kulon something that had been lost everywhere else on Earth, a place where they can live without constant human pressure. Camera traps occasionally capture images of these elusive giants, proof that sometimes the greatest conservation victories come from simply giving nature space to heal itself. The coral reefs surrounding the restored islands tell an equally impressive story. Born from the volcanic activity that followed Krakatoa's destruction, these underwater gardens now rival any in the tropical world for their biodiversity and beauty. Fish populations that were decimated by the initial disaster have not only recovered, but evolved into new ecological relationships, creating food webs of stunning complexity in waters that were once sterile and lifeless. Historians still argue whether the century-long recovery represents typical ecosystem resilience, or if Krakatoa's aftermath demonstrated unusual regenerative capacity. But standing in this green paradise, you understand that the question misses the point. What matters is that life found a way, not just to survive catastrophe on an almost unimaginable scale, but to transform it into opportunity. The irony is profound and permanent. The same forces that caused such tremendous human suffering also created the conditions for one of conservation's greatest success stories. The tsunami that killed 36,000 people also eliminated the human pressure that was driving countless species toward extinction. The volcanic ash that buried entire civilizations also enriched soils that would support forests of unprecedented diversity. Anak Krakatoa continues to grow, in the distance occasionally reminding everyone that the forces that created this paradise are still active, still capable of reshaping the world without warning. But rather than a threat, the young volcano now seems like a guardian, its presence ensuring that this corner of the world remains too dynamic, too unpredictable for large-scale human development. As afternoon light filters through the canopy painting, everything in shades of gold and green, you're struck by the profound lesson written in this landscape. Nature doesn't mourn its losses or celebrate its victories. It simply adapts, persists, and rebuilds. The century-long healing of Krakatoa's wounds speaks to something far larger than ecological resilience. It's a testament to life's fundamental refusal to surrender even in the face of forces that seem designed to end everything. Walking back through this reclaimed paradise, you carry with you the knowledge that you've witnessed one of the most remarkable transformations in natural history. From the floating graveyard of 1883 to the thriving sanctuary of today, the story of Krakatoa's recovery reminds us that even our worst disasters can become the seeds of unexpected renewal. In the gentle evening sounds of this reborn wilderness, you hear the whispered promise that life always finds a way forward, even from the edge of extinction. The sun sets through the canopy, painting the sky in colors that would have been impossible to imagine during those ash-darkened days a century ago. As darkness settles over this Eden born from apocalypse, you close your eyes and listen to the sounds of a world that refused to die, a lullaby sung by countless species that owe their existence to catastrophe, transformed into hope. The story of Krakatoa teaches us that endings are often just beginnings, in disguise that destruction can clear the way for creation, and that nature's capacity for renewal exceeds even our most optimistic imagination. In this place, where death once reigned, supreme life has written its most beautiful poem, a century-long verse about resilience, adaptation, and the unbreakable spirit of existence itself. Sleep well, knowing that even in our darkest moments, the seeds of recovery are already being scattered by winds we cannot see, carried by currents we cannot control toward shores we cannot yet imagine.